Hi, everybody. We are here in Denver, Colorado, recording episode number 2 of the Minsanity Podcast. My guest today is a person that is well known in the mineral community, both on the academic side and the collecting side. He's been a collector, a scientist, and a researcher for decades now, and he's traveled all over the world studying mineralogy, geology, and the intersection of the sciences and how they relate to collecting. He did his PhD at the State University of New York, followed by a postdoc and then a professorship at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And most recently, he is the state mineralogist of New Mexico and the senior curator of the New Mexico Bureau of Mines Museum in Socorro, New Mexico. Dr. John Rakovan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cheers, man.
Great to have you on. So, John, a lot of folks know you through your work in the academic side of mineral collecting, but you're also a passionate collector yourself and have been since you were a kid. How did you initially get exposed to minerals growing up, and where did you grow up, and when did you know that minerals were going to be a big part of your life?
Great questions. I was thinking about this last night, actually, trying to remember the first time I remember thinking about a mineral. I grew up, my father was in radio broadcasting,
okay,
and that moved us around quite a bit when I was younger. I was born in Buffalo, New York, but we quickly moved to Michigan.
Okay.
And all my siblings were born in Michigan. It was in Michigan where I got turned on to minerals, at least my first recollections of those. And it was collecting Petoskey stones with my parents and my grandparents.
Okay.
Actually, I think the first Petoskey stone I collected was out of the neighbor's driveway, but
once
I came home with it and said, hey, what's this?
Yeah.
My folks took me to the beach, and
nice.
My grandparents lived on Lake Michigan.
Okay.
And in the town they lived in, which is Onekama, it's just south of Traverse City.
Okay.
So that was Petoskey area.
That's Petoskey Stone territory.
Exactly.
Up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a fella named Arlie Klein, and Arlie had a rock shop. Michigan, there was a lot of mineral collectors and rock hounds in Michigan, and at that time, this was in the late 60s, early 70s. There were a lot of rock shops around. Arlie Klein's rock shop was just across the street from my grandparents. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting agates and talking to Arlie all the time. And that's kind of where I first got hooked.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you remember having a sort of a fascination with them at a pretty young age, it sounds like that.
Definitely. You know, and I see a lot of kids, young children, I think it's just part of, discovering the world.
Yeah, being
this
curious
is a
about
part
the
of
natural
it.
world. Yep.
And so many people are interested in it, and then other things become interesting,
mm-hmm.
and those might go away. The rocks never went away from me.
Same for me, 100%.
Yeah.
So then I know you sort of moved to the East Coast at a certain point, and you got in with some folks in the New England mineral scene that acted as mentors. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was I was in 4th grade. It was in 1975, and my father got transferred to Rhode Island for the radio work. And we moved out there in 76. No, we moved there in 75. In 76, I remember this. That was the bicentennial of the U.S.
Okay, yeah.
And we were on Narragansett Bay. All the tall ships came in. It was just unbelievable to be there at that time. But my mom, and I have to really credit my folks for being, for recognizing the passion in their child, even though they didn't understand it. They're like,
exact same with my folks. We don't know why our kid's so obsessed with rocks, but we're going to be supportive of it and nurture that.
Yeah. And thank God for parents like that. And
100%.
I was going to, if you see a spark, doesn't matter where it is, nurture it.
You have to nurture that.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So your parents were supportive. So you went to Rhode Island.
We went to Rhode Island. One of the very first things my mom did was look for things to, for the kids. Mm-hmm. And she noticed that there was a mineral show. The Rhode Island Mineral Hunters had advertised in the newspaper a mineral show in Barrington, Rhode Island at the time. And so she took me down to this. It was this, I think it was in May. And excuse me, we met somebody who became a very, very close friend of mine for most of his life, or most of my life. And a mentor in terms of mineral collecting. That was Sal Avella.
Yeah.
And I remember,
famous guy in the New England mineral scene.
If anybody is from New England and they're into minerals, they know Sal.
They do.
And I remember this very distinctly. We got to know Sal, and he's like, "Oh, what are you interested in?" And we had just moved there, and I had just looked at, I can't remember who the author is. There are two, it's not the Golden Guide, but there are two books, one on minerals and one on gems. They're little, pocket paperback books.
Yeah, mass produced.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there was a forsterite in there, an olivine crystal that just captured my interest.
Yeah.
And I said, I'd like to have one of these olivine crystals. And so little did I know at the time how rare those were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't have any here, but why don't you come to my shop? And my mom got the information, and we went to visit Sal maybe a month later. And that led to, I probably drove to Sal's 1,000 times, might not be an exaggeration.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
it was the same for me with Franklin, New Jersey, that, the Houck brothers and the museum, it was like Aladdin's cave. And I have such visceral memories of just being in their shop, being in their garage, and just being surrounded by all these innumerable treasures. And it sounds like Sal's place was like that.
It was like that, yeah. And my mom would, until I was able to drive, she was so patient. Anytime I asked, we would go, and she would sit there until I was done. She'd never once said, "Oh, we got to go." Yep. And I love that.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow. So that was fairly early on then, at the age of what, 8, 10, 12?
Yeah, well, what is 5th grade? Around there.
Sure. Yep.
And until I could drive, she would be my main mode of transportation.
Great.
Sometimes Sal would invite me to participate in things, and you mentioned the Houcks. I don't know if this was your experience, but in New England, Sal was very connected with the mineral collecting community. And so at that age, the people I became friends with as a child, but they were all adults. Carl Francis, Bill Metropolis, Russ Benke, the Cares, Janet and her husband, many people in New England, and they were just the people I hung out with.
Yeah, exactly. They're just normal folks. Now it was the same for me. I thought, wow, I got plugged in with these legends, so to speak, so early on. And that kind of exposure and mentorship is invaluable. When you're at that age.
Absolutely. And so many cool experiences because of that.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit. I know you were in Rhode Island around the time of the famous sceptered amethyst find at Hopkinton, and I bet that was exciting to be part of that.
That was very exciting. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story. Sal got a phone call from a couple of school teachers. They had just bought a property in Hopkinton, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And it was a fairly large property. Had a house on it that was extant, but they built a new house. And apparently they found these specimens, and they decided they needed to get some guidance.
Okay.
And they looked in the phone book. And of course, Sal's business was called Apple Valley Minerals.
Okay.
And it started in 1960.
Wow.
It was a butcher shop, actually. Sal was a butcher by profession.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
And he started with that, but he got into mineral collecting that same year.
Okay.
And had collected so much material. He's like, I got to start selling this. I don't have room for it. And that's where the shop came in.
Wow. Okay.
Anyway, they called Sal and said the chickens. So this was an old farm. The chickens have been digging up purple rocks. Honest to God, true story.
That's a great soundbite. Yeah. And he said, I'll be right over.
Yeah, exactly. So Sal called me. I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
This was 80 or 81. It was 81. Okay. And anyway, he told me the story. He said, "Do you want to go down and take a look?" Of course, I want to go down and take a look. And so we drove down and met with the landowners, and what they had found was amethyst. And then they said they poked around where the chickens were digging up, scratching up the amethyst, and they had found some specimens. They showed us the specimens, and we were blown away.
Wow. Yeah.
They were mostly milky quartz, but they were world-class milky quartz.
Wow.
If it weren't for the amethyst, Rhode Island would be known for the milky quartz.
Yeah, they were so good. Yeah. Especially for somebody's backyard in a random town in Rhode Island.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So we quickly learned through conversation with them that the reason the chickens were digging them up, why did the chickens discover them and nobody else, is when they built the house, they dug a new leach field for the septic system.
Okay.
And it was the leftover dirt that they had put in and made a garden on.
Oh, and they dug this trench out, and then now the chickens are scratching
it in that, and they had hit just by circumstance the main part of what we later on we dug there for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Afterwards, I'll tell you a little bit about that, but they were lucky. They hit the right spot. They put the dirt there, and we realized, okay, well, that's what it is. Yep. Can we dig? And they said, well, we don't want you to dig up our new leach field,
right?
But we know where it is, the outline of it. You can dig around it. And so we started.
Wow.
And
you and Sal.
Sal and myself. It was just the two of us at the time that were digging. Sal had a very close friend, Freddie Cochran, who was living at his house.
Yep.
And Freddie was always there, but Freddie wasn't into digging,
so
he'd hang out.
He was supervising.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
gotcha.
For the first couple of years, it was just me and Sal.
Yeah.
And then, for those of you who have met Sal, one of the most generous, thoughtful people in the world.
I've heard that. Yeah.
As a mineral collector, if you wanted to buy a mineral specimen, Sal was wonderful. If you wanted to sell a mineral specimen, that was a different thing.
Sounds just like some of my mentors when I was growing up. I was never on the other end of the equation, so I never experienced that. But
But Sal was great. He decided, I want to bring more friends into this.
Okay.
But I also want to make this fun.
Yep.
And I don't want to overextend my welcome with the landowners.
Of course.
And the arrangement that they made, of course, Sal was in the business, and they had made a financial arrangement that he would pay for the digging. By the way, to get to the amethyst, the first few holes we had to go at least 20 feet deep.
Oh wow! So were you digging with a small excavator then?
Yeah, we had a backhoe.
So this was a serious dig.
It was, and you could never get to this without having gone down with a backhoe.
I see.
It would have just been impossible.
Impossible. Yeah.
So it cost some money to do this, and the arrangement was we'd dig. Mm-hmm. Sal sold the material through the shop. Yep. And then I don't know, but I think they basically split the proceeds.
Split the returns.
Yeah.
And you were along for the ride.
I was along for the ride. I got to study it. I got to acquire some of the pieces, which was great. And I only over time acquired maybe a dozen pieces at most.
Yeah.
I still have all of them.
You have a big one that I covered in particular that's rather special.
Well, I have some very good ones. I have what I consider the best one, and that was Sal's throughout his, since it was found. But about 2 years before he passed, he said he'd like to give it to me at that point.
That's cool.
And that's when I got that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what a thrill to be able to collect really world-class specimens in a place like Rhode Island that's not at the top of most mineral collectors' minds when they think of, mineral hotspots.
Yep.
So when did you first get the idea that geoscience might be a career for you, might be something that you want to study in college? And
when you ask a kid what do they want to do when they grow up, whatever they're interested in at the time, right?
Of course. So, I want to be a rock guy.
I want to be a fireman. Whatever. And I was into minerals at the time, so I didn't know what a mineralogist was. I'd never heard the term.
Yeah.
But I wanted to, if I could study minerals, that sounded like a cool thing.
Yeah.
And then in high school, when I got to high school, that's when I started to really think about science.
Did you have an earth science class in high school? Or?
No, I didn't. But through my connections with Sal, and Sal didn't have an academic background, but this whole group, this community that I was inducted into by friendship with all these people, I started to learn on my own. Yeah. The aspects of the science and stuff. And I realized chemistry was a big part of it. Yeah. And so in high school, I was so excited to take chemistry.
Cool. Yeah.
And prior to that, though, I had to take biology. And I had an AP biology course that half the class wanted to be biologists after they were done with the class. And myself included. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And then next year was chemistry. And I was just...
Yeah, never looked back.
Yeah. Well, actually, what happened, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it was a very poorly organized course. Okay. And it did not meet my expectations. But that was okay, because I knew what I wanted at that point. Yeah. Yeah. And so it was around high school that I decided, hey, I'm very interested in science. And this is something I was glad to have been invited for this interview. And we'll talk more about this hopefully in a little bit. But one of the things that I've come to realize is, for me, minerals have been a gateway to a love of science. Yeah. And that pursuit. Yep. And it doesn't matter what the science is. I've been lucky. I've had the opportunity to pursue the science of mineralogy. Yeah. I'm very lucky about that. But biology, physics, chemistry, all very interesting to me. And, one of the many reasons to foster those interests.
Yeah, well, and these things, these
children.
objects captivate us in an aesthetic level initially, which is understandable. And then that leads to an appreciation and a curiosity about the natural world. And that curiosity fosters a love of science, right? Can foster a career in science.
Yeah.
So I would love to dig into your thoughts on that a little bit. So moving forward a little bit, so you went off to college, then that was followed by graduate school. What did you, kind of taking stock of what your options were and your passions and where you decided to go, when you got the PhD, the next day you woke up and said, okay, I'm a mineralogist now? Or where was your kind of thought process at that time?
So I'd like to back up and tell you a story that you might appreciate.
Okay, sure.
It had to do with the college thing.
Okay.
So I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't have a lot of guidance. I wish I had asked. I knew Carl at the time, Francis, who was the curator at Harvard, and I wish I had asked him more questions about this. But long story short is I didn't have great guidance in terms of, okay, you should look to this school or that school for if you want to do mineralogy.
Yep.
So I didn't understand the field and the discipline and the people out there. I decided to go to school close to home, in part because it was easy, and also schools that my friends were going to.
Of course.
And they had good geology programs from what I understood.
Yep.
And I went to Boston University to start.
Okay.
When you talk to people who don't know geology, of course they don't know the nuances and the subtleties of different departments and different aspects of research.
Yep.
They talk about what they have heard, right?
Of course.
And one of the top schools in geology has always been Colorado School of Mines.
Yep.
So I was always hearing this. I knew nothing about the CSM, but so at one point I decided, okay, I'm going to apply. I think I want to go to CSM.
Okay.
I actually came out to visit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I applied. I ended up going to Boston University and thought, okay, I'll do a year here and then
transfer to
Mines. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I never got a letter back from them. I
Okay.
thought, okay, well, I didn't get accepted. It turns out that the letter did come.
Oh, no.
And it got displaced in my parents' house.
Yeah.
And about a year later, after I had gone to another school, we found it.
Well, if your mailman had been a little better, maybe you'd be the state mineralogist of Colorado now, not in Mexico. But that's a different discussion.
You know what? I know now, actually, that CSM would have been a great school to go to, and it would have led me on a different trajectory.
Sure.
But it probably wasn't the right one for me.
Well, I'm a CSM grad who had a very convoluted undergrad experience where I flunked out the first time and got a master's degree the second time. So, and that's not a unique story either. So I think you might have made the right call.
Yeah.
But okay, so you were at BU.
Yeah.
And then you finished and thought, I'm going to do the PhD because I want to go into academia, or you were still into the idea of being a mineralogist, being a professional mineralogist?
I have never, to this day, set my sights on academia as my career option.
Okay.
What has always motivated me is the interest in working with minerals.
Yeah.
And so it didn't matter if it was industry or academia or whatever.
You wanted an avenue to get to.
I wanted an avenue,
minerals.
and so I pursued every possible avenue. So I went to school and I started looking for the right program. We could talk about hours about undergraduate, but I eventually got the right program, and it was a long and convoluted road, but I had wonderful experiences. But in the end, at the end of the day, and this is some advice I have for anybody as an academic advisor to students. When you're thinking about a career, apply for everything that's a possibility and think out of the box.
Cast a broad net.
Cast a very broad net, and at the end of the day, walk through the door that's the best one. But the door won't be open unless you apply.
Yeah.
So you gotta cast a broad net. And I had my first job offers were in industry.
Okay.
This
is after undergrad or after a PhD?
At every step of the way.
At every step, okay.
When I finished, as I was finishing my undergraduate, I had a job offer to work in the glass industry.
Okay, interesting.
For an automotive company in Toledo, Ohio that made windshield glass.
Interesting.
They wanted a mineralogist to do quality control on their starting products.
Okay, wow. Yeah, interesting.
So I applied for that. I got the job.
Okay.
Applied for grad school, got accepted. I'm going that way.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Wow. Yeah.
But I knew at that point, I had learned a lot more, obviously, as an undergraduate. And I realized crystallography was something I really wanted to do. And I don't know if this made any sense at all. You try to do the best you can.
Yep.
I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to study crystallography and study minerals, might as well pick a mineral that has some application. I might get a job afterwards.
You just predicted my next question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is it?
Well, a lot of folks know you as Mr. Appetite.
Yes.
How did you become Mr. Appetite? How did appetite become a focus of your research and your collecting?
So let me back up to the masters and then I'll answer your question. So at that time, I had no idea about, well, I knew what appetite was. It's number 5 on the, on the hardness scale.
Sure, yeah.
Because of the background and the experience I had, my undergraduate's from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
In chemistry?
In geology. Geology.
Yep.
But they had a very strong program in mineralogy.
Okay.
In fact, there were 4 mineralogists in the department in different areas.
Okay.
Very strong program in clay mineralogy.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I learned a lot about clays. In fact, they did a lot of undergraduate research dealing with clays, and I realized, that's what I learned. This is an important area.
Yeah, this has major application in all aspects of society and
exactly.
science.
Yeah. So I decided I want to do phyllosilicate crystallography.
Okay.
No specifics.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's again a broad net. There's lots of phyllosilicates out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and at the time there were probably 2 people in the United States doing that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Steve Guggenheim at the University of Illinois was one of them.
Yep.
And the other was, there were a couple other people, but anyway, I applied. I got accepted to do my master's with Steve Guggenheim.
Okay.
And I went and I worked on layer silicate mineralogy there.
Okay.
Then I went to Stony Brook for my PhD. Again, not knowing exactly what I wanted to work on in terms of the phases. I knew I wanted to do mineral structures. And I went to work with John Parisi, who works on zeolites, another group of minerals that have huge industrial applications.
Yep. In the mineral world, they're a lowly caste. But in the scientific world, they're rather elevated in terms of their importance. Yeah. Okay, interesting. So you kind of got the foundations as a crystallographer, as a structural guy.
And then Stony Brook, this was a wonderful experience and something I'm very appreciative of. The department required that all students coming out, all graduate students, actually do multiple projects in areas that are not the one they defined when they came in. So some people would come in, they wouldn't have a defined project.
Sure.
But I came in working with zeolites, working with Parisi, and they wanted me to do some other things. And so I explored what else was going on in the department. And there was a fellow named Rich Reeder who became my advisor. Okay. And Rich was working on aspects of crystal growth.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And as a mineral collector, that really appealed to me.
Yeah, of course. It's a fundamental question and one that's surprisingly not as well explained as people would think. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the opportunity to do that exploration led to me switching advisors, getting into a project that was, I couldn't have planned it. And it was so well suited for my interest that it was perfect. I felt like a kid in the candy store.
Wow.
So 5 years of PhD, and it was just fun the whole
time. Flew by. Yeah. Not everybody can say that. Yeah. Wow. And that was working with Appetite Group?
Well, so back to your question. What we fundamentally were looking at is a phenomenon known as sectoral and intrasectoral zoning. Okay. And if I can explain this really simply, a crystal like apatite has different surfaces that are not related by symmetry. Okay. The pinacoid versus the prism face. And it turns out the crystal structure on those faces is different. Okay. Because of symmetry. Yep. And as a crystal is growing, because the surfaces are different, you could imagine that the position that an atom takes on a surface as the crystal is growing. Crystals grow, by the way, by atoms coming from the environment attaching to the surface. Okay. And so imagine that all the spots for the atoms to attach were square on one face and round on the other face.
I see.
Well, the square atoms went into the square holes and the round atoms went into the round holes.
Yep. I see.
And different faces would incorporate different elements. Okay. That's the whole principle behind these types of zoning.
Interesting. Okay.
And anyway, they had just discovered this phenomenon called intrasectoral zoning. Okay. There was a woman there who's now a professor of mineralogy at McGill University. Her name is Jean Paquette. Okay. And Rich Reeder, by the way, worked almost exclusively for most of his career on carbonates.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I still get phone calls asking to do carbonate work, which I never did.
Yeah. You must be a carbonate guy. Yeah. And you're not. Okay.
And so
interesting. Wow.
I understood the principles behind what we were looking at, but I didn't want to repeat what everybody was doing. I wanted to branch out into something different.
Yep.
And this is a true story. I went to Harvard because I knew Carl.
Yep.
And I went specifically to look through the drawers at Harvard University because I was looking for specific surface features, which I would then take those samples home. We're back to Stony Brook, and analyze to look for the phenomena that I was looking for.
Yep.
And my thought was, I'm going to work on quartz. Quartz would be the ideal thing. And I looked through quartz, and I brought it back a whole bunch of quartz, as well as many other minerals, including an apatite.
Okay, I see.
And the first one that I found the best example of intersectoral zoning in was apatite.
Was the apatite, okay.
And that is what led me into what has been a career looking at this one mineral because it's so multifaceted.
Well, and it sounds like you were in a fortunate position where your advisor and your committee was supportive of you being able to do that exploration to decide how you wanted to design and focus your PhD, which is fantastic.
Exactly. And it played on my experiences as a mineral collector. I went to Harvard because I knew Carl because I was a mineral collector.
Yeah, exactly.
All these things came back together.
Well, and that going back to what we were discussing a little earlier, that curiosity fundamentally drove you to think a little outside the box. I think a lot of students go to graduate school or even undergraduate research and it's okay, tell me what I'm doing, how am I approaching this? And that's fine, but that curiosity can drive a different thought process and a different kind of experience, right? And it sounds like that was foundational for you.
Absolutely. And this is a guidance or a recommendation I have for students that I've realized over time is a little bit selfish and not for everybody. Because I was very fortunate financially and otherwise to be able to pursue my interest without other concerns.
Of course. Yeah, myself too.
I realize not everybody has those opportunities. Yeah. Even if they do have the opportunity to get an education, they might need to focus in certain areas
there can be
for one of the
for
things.
A whole variety
exactly.
Of reasons.
Yeah. But people ask me, why would you do, what should be the guiding rule for doing a PhD? This is my personal experience, but I do feel strongly about it. Because you love the subject and that's it. Yeah. Because you want to do it.
Yeah, you don't need to put conditions on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, my motivation was to study minerals, to work with minerals. It wasn't to get a PhD. It wasn't to become a professor. Yeah. It was just that whatever pathway would take me there.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, and I think that's something that a lot of students resonate with and certainly resonated in my experience. And I found that having a sort of unconventional childhood in the sense that I had friends that were my grandparents' age that were my legitimate friends, and so did you.
Sal.
I thought outside the box a little bit when it came to all that. And the people I really clicked with in undergrad and grad school were often the sort of the non-traditional students, the ones that designed their own thing, the ones that came from a different background. And I think that's an intersectionality that we have in the mineral community between the quote-unquote professional and the amateur communities. And when it comes to that intersection, in my mind, you're the guy. You are the one who is really representing both sides of those communities equally in a sense, and what you do, what your passions are, what your background is. So I would love to hear, skipping forward a little bit, past your postdoc and past Stony Brook, you landed at Miami University, which is known as a top-tier research university, but also as a school that provides an exceptional undergraduate education. How did you find being a young professor, finding that balance between, on the one hand, doing research and pursuing high-level mineralogy and science, and on the other hand, passing that torch and mentoring young people through being a professor?
Okay, two questions there. I'll start with the first one, and then also throw in a shout out for a very good friend and a mentor of mine, John Hughes.
Great.
So part of the reason I was hired at Miami, I think, was because of the chair of the department there at the time, John Hughes, who's again a good friend and has been a collaborator for my entire career. I was surprised. In fact, I hadn't known about Miami until I met John at Miami. It was during an MSA, Mineralogical Society of America workshop that was being held there.
Yeah.
And long story short is, I fell in love with the school. I thought there's no way they're ever going to hire me because they already have a mineralogist. And lo and behold, I get hired there.
Yeah.
And one of the very first things that John and I did together was co-edit reviews of mineralogy volume on phosphates.
Oh, wow.
Mostly on apatite.
Okay.
And we've been working together ever since.
Fantastic. Okay.
John made me realize that Miami's first mission is undergraduate education.
Yeah.
But there are departments with distinction that have PhDs and oftentimes very, very well known in the field.
Yeah, are doing high-level research.
High-level research. And geology was one of those.
Yeah.
So it was great as a young professor because I didn't have the pressures of being like at an R1 university in terms of the amount of dollars that I had to bring in.
You didn't feel like you were on the treadmill
Exactly.
of, got to publish X amount, got to bring in X amount of dollars, know.
Although there is a little bit of that, I realized, publish grants, I had to get those things in, but the pressure wasn't so high that I couldn't, redial my focus on, hey, I have the opportunity to do what I want here.
Yeah.
It's right. It's mineralogy.
Yeah.
I want to bring in the money to do my mineralogy.
Of course.
I wasn't so worried about it, so I just did it.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful environment to work in. I learned, because again, my motivation, even to this point, is to be able to do mineralogy, to work with minerals.
Yeah.
Teaching was never a goal.
Yeah.
But I learned that I love teaching.
Yeah.
Because I get to share what I love.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what teaching
huge.
is.
It is. Absolutely. You're passing that torch, passing that excitement, passing that knowledge.
And so mentoring students and young people became something that I hadn't expected, one of the most fulfilling parts of being a professor.
Yeah. Well, and the way I got to know you initially was through some of your students. Okay. And it's almost a chicken or the egg question of, did you inspire your students, then they inspire you? Maybe tell us a few stories, just memorable stories during your Miami tenure of experiences you had with young people, with students.
Okay. One of the best ways of teaching is one-on-one. Yeah. And when you work with a graduate student, if you're advising a graduate student, you're not in the classroom. Of course, you do plenty of that.
Yeah.
But you are doing science together, and science is not. When you take a science class, for the most part, it's not doing science. Science is an activity.
You're learning the pedagogical.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing the exercise, but you're not doing the thing.
You're not doing science, right?
Yeah.
So you're learning the information that has been gained through the scientific method, but science is an activity, and it's a process. When you advise a student and work with a graduate student on a project, you're doing science together. So you're both discovering and learning together. Yeah. Now, as an advisor, you hopefully know a little bit more, at least to start. The goal is that particularly at the PhD level, the goal is your student becomes the master.
You're eclipsed by your student, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and I love it.
Yeah.
And when you reach that point, I'm ecstatic.
That must be a great feeling.
Made it.
Yeah, exactly. You've made it. That's the ultimate mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were working with students at the master's and the PhD level, correct?
Yes. Yeah. My first couple students were masters, which is a useful thing for a beginning professor, because you get them graduated and you can check that box that you've graduated students.
Yep.
My very first, actually, this is interesting. My very first student, Stephanie Bosey. If you're out there, Stephanie, hello.
Okay.
I don't even remember the conversation exactly, but long story short is she decided, okay, I'd like to come work on this project that you've defined, which I had to do with a continuation of the work on sectoral zoning, but I wanted to get away from apatite and look at some other things, and it had to do with fluorite. Okay. And I had presented, it was the International Mineralogical Association meeting, the IMA meeting in Toronto in 1998. It was the first semester I was a professor. Yeah. And I didn't have anything new because I'd been presenting all my PhD stuff.
Sure, yeah. You were in that transition between your PhD and your future research. Yeah.
And so I presented a proposal, essentially. Okay. Not as a proposal, but I talked about the science behind it. And the proposal was to look at sectoral zoning in fluorite. Mm-hmm. And there was this guy in the audience at the end of this. He rose his hand and said, "Hi, my name is Virgil Luth."
Wow, okay.
You might know where I'm going.
And little did you know the future bearings that would have on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
He said, I'm at the New Mexico Bureau of Mines. Yep. And we have this site called Hansenburg Mining District, which is very close to the campus. Yep. And we have fluorites there that show exactly what you're talking about. I think you ought to come down and take a look.
Wow. Yeah.
So long story short is I wrote an NSF proposal. It got funded.
Wow. Yeah.
First time around as a new professor.
Of course.
Wonderful.
That's a good feeling.
To look at sector, and here comes this new graduate student, and she says, I really want a field component to my research. Of course, I was doing all lab work.
Lab-based, yeah.
So she ended up working in the Hansonburg district.
Wow.
And this is something, the display I have here today at Tucson, or I mean at Denver.
At the Hard Rock Summit,
the other,
the other big mineral show, yeah.
Is on fluorites that just came out of the ground.
Fantastic.
One of the best finds, I think, in the history of the deposit.
Wow.
From the Hansonburg.
And they illustrate this fascinating sectoral zoning phenomenon.
These particular ones don't, as far as I know. At least they don't visually.
Sure.
The ones that we studied did. In terms of color zoning. But anyway, that was part of 25 years of serendipity that ultimately led to where I am today.
Yeah. So while we're on that vein, let's bump forward again.
Sure.
Into the latest phase of your career and your journey with minerals, which is being the New Mexico State mineralogist and being the senior curator at the Bureau Museum in Socorro. What led you to New Mexico, and what's your experience been like so far being in New Mexico?
So as I just mentioned, my first student worked in the Hansonburg mining district because of this serendipitous interaction with Virgil Luth. 26 years ago now. At the IMA meeting in Montreal, and my first 3 students actually ended up working in Hansonburg. So the early part of my career at Miami, all of my field work and a lot of my lab work was associated with working in New Mexico. I fell in love with the state. My wife Monica and I, over the 25 years that we were in Oxford and Miami, oftentimes would go down on personal vacations to New Mexico. I had, anyway, a lot of connections to the state, a lot of interest in what was going on down there. Knew Virgil very well. We collaborated, by the way, Virgil and I, on all of these projects. So he was not a direct advisor, but he was part of the projects with all of these students. I guess it was 2020.
Virgil decided he was going to be retiring.
Virgil decided to retire. And before he announced it, he called me.
And
to tell me that he was going to be doing this and to ask would I potentially be interested in the position. Now, of course, I understand how academic departments work. It's not his decision.
No, there's an external hiring and interview process. But what better endorsement to get than, hey John, what do you think about New Mexico? Fabulous.
And I'm a senior person. I spent 25 years and I was a full professor at Miami. And that comes with some expectations on my part.
Of course.
I wasn't going to come here as an assistant professor.
No, exactly. It had to be the right position.
Anyway, he wanted to feel me out, my interest in what it might take to get me down there.
Sure,
As we're on the phone, I'm pinching myself, of course. But I had to be honest. Of course, Monica.
Of course. Who is also a high-level geoscience person and has her own company and a PhD in geology.
We had to make this work for both of us.
Of course.
Anyway, long story short is, I said, absolutely, I'm interested in the job. These are the things I would be interested in. He went to the director of the Bureau, who's the state geologist, and it all fell into place and went through the interview process. It was a competitive process. There were 3 or 4 people, I believe.
Applicants.
I don't know who they are.
Sure.
I shouldn't. But I was offered the position.
Fantastic. And you've been there now for a year.
Exactly a year. Well, almost exactly a year. My starting date was September 1st last year.
Wow. And now you're at the intersection of a lot of themes that I sense have been in your life and your career from the start. You're a museum guy, you're a collector, you're a researcher, you're an advisor, you're a teacher. How does it feel to be in a role where you balance all of these things and sort of combine them in different ways?
It's totally awesome. I mean, cool. I feel super fortunate for several things. One is to have the opportunity. It's a good time in my life to have had the change. But it's a positive change. In my opinion, it's a step up. A lot of people have said to me, oh, you're no longer a professor. That doesn't matter to me.
No.
What matters to me is I get to work with minerals. That's always been the driving force.
That's the theme. That's the consistent thing.
And now I get more time to do that in ways that I haven't up until now been able to do it professionally.
That's great. So what are one or two things that you're excited about happening at the Bureau, happening at the museum
right now,
and moving, say, and looking the next 6 months to a year?
It's been a crazy year because it's only a year, but so much has happened. And I'll just mention two things. On the museum front, in the case of the museum, I stepped into a well-oiled machine because of Virgil and our curator, Kelsey McNamara. And I didn't have to build anything.
There were no fires to put out. There was no crisis, and that's a good feeling.
Exactly.
In any museum role, that's a good feeling. Yeah.
And one of the things we do is the New Mexico Mineral Symposium, which is a big event. It's in fact, it was in the job ad. You know when something is in the ad. That's
it's important.
Perspective.
Yeah. And shout out to those of you that don't know about the New Mexico Mineral Symposium. It is the best mineral event in the country that's not a mineral show. So make sure you go there.
Thank you for that endorsement. And I hope people do, if you've not come to this event. It's wonderful. And maybe we'll have time to talk about it. One of the things that I'm really interested in is I've been thinking a lot of what's the significance of mineral museums? Why are they there? What's their purpose? The raison d'etre. And of course, the institutions in which those museums reside oftentimes define what those purposes are. It's really interesting. Our museum was chartered not by the state legislature, by the territorial legislature.
Oh, wow.
Before New Mexico was a state.
Yeah.
When the university, New Mexico Tech, today, which is the New Mexico School of Mines back then. This is in 1889, I think.
Okay.
It's in the charter of the university that the university would create a mineral cabinet. Now, of course, that was the terminology of the time.
Sure, the colloquialism of the time. That basically create a state collection. That was in your charter.
And the purpose of that was for threefold in that charter. For research, teaching, and the enjoyment or edification of the New Mexico public. Now, I've come to realize that there's a fourth very important, and I think might be the most important for many museums, purposes. So we think about, and we oftentimes promote the educational aspect of the museum. I want to say this precisely because it's very important to communicate what I'm trying to say. That is the goal, I think, in most administrators and curators' minds. But I've come to realize that when I went into Harvard the umpteenth time to look at the minerals, or any museum that I've become really familiar with, I was learning by observation, but I wasn't learning by reading the text. And it's not the same as taking a class or doing research or reading a book. What I was doing is I was being inspired to go and learn where with the tools and in the place that was appropriate for that. The learning for me has taken 30, 40 years.
Of course. That the museum was the spark.
It's the spark. It's the inspiration. And I think mineral collections, my goal for our mineral collection, what I think is the penultimate raison d'etre, is the inspiration of a love of minerals or a love of science in general. Again, it doesn't matter if it's biology or chemistry or physics. If the minerals are the hook, right?
Well, and designing a museum that can facilitate that spark.
Yeah.
I think that's a mission that is at the core of all museums, and sometimes maybe gets buried under other priorities or other goals. That inspiration, that foundation is so important.
Yeah, and that in the role of a curator in dealing with the museum, that's what excites me right now. It's not that hasn't been done. The museum is fantastic.
Of course.
It is so inspirational.
You came in with a foundation plus.
Exactly. But that's where that's where my mind is and what I want to pursue. And actually, I want to pursue a lot more of the educational content, which won't be in the museum, but the museum will be a pathway to get there. And we don't have time to get into how the mechanism of that, but that's what excites me.
Well,
right
that's
now about the
exciting,
museum.
and it sounds like you have the toolkit and the resources to hopefully make that happen.
I hope so, and I'm very excited about working with colleagues, not just at New Mexico Tech, but other museums.
Yeah.
The Colorado School of Mines Mineral Museum and Michigan Tech's Mineral Museum have similar goals and foci as we're all mining schools.
Exactly.
And
you have that tradition, that lineage, that history.
And we're talking amongst one another to work together for that educational component. I mean, that really excites me.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
On the research side, I'm going to continue many of the things I'm currently doing.
Okay.
I won't get into those at the moment, but something that's new and something that's happened in the last year, which, knock on wood, has been very fortuitous. One of the tools that I've used most in my career and that I'm actually very interested in, both in terms of advancement and just the fundamental understanding of the physics behind it, is diffraction.
Okay.
And I've mostly used X-rays for diffraction purposes, and that's how we determine crystal structures. It's oftentimes used for mineral identification.
So maybe to back up real quick, give our listeners a 30-second primer on diffraction, if you'd be so kind.
Diffraction is a wave phenomenon, and so it can happen with sound waves, it can happen with water waves, it can happen with the waves of particles. And so in quantum physics and our understanding of the nature of matter, subatomic particles like protons and electrons and neutrons have both particle and wave-like nature. And the wave aspect of those particles allows them to undergo a phenomenon that's true of any wave, again, like a sound wave, and it's called diffraction. And we probably don't have time to get into all the details of what exactly diffraction is.
But fundamentally it's a way to examine the properties of minerals in a couple different interstices and spaces.
Exactly, and this tool of diffraction allows us to do several things, including determine the arrangement of atoms within a crystal, what we call the structure. And as I mentioned, my degrees in college were in crystal structure, crystallography. So diffraction is one of the main tools.
And you have some XRD or diffraction instruments that you're working with at the Bureau currently?
We do, and I have a long history in my career of working with neutron diffraction, and one of the sources that I use for that is Los Alamos.
I was going to say, one of your large lasers right up the road there.
Exactly. And anyway, that's all come together, and I've been funded by Los Alamos and the National Nuclear Safety Administration to form a diffraction center at New Mexico Tech.
Congrats.
And we're going to bring in some instrumentation that is state-of-the-art in terms of X-rays. We're going to combine this with what's going on at Los Alamos with the neutrons.
Fantastic.
And I suspect that that's going to probably take me maybe to the end of my paid career.
That will be a journey for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
And my focus will still be on the minerals, but I have these amazing tools to do that with.
Yeah, well, what a gift to be in a place where you can utilize those resources. So John, in closing, I want to ask you two things. One is for folks watching this, and I'm not sure exactly what time of year it will be, but this will apply to next year as well. Why should you attend the New Mexico Mineral Symposium if you've never been? And the other question is, you're somebody who has been a mentor and an inspiration to a lot of young people, myself included, getting into geoscience and looking at career options and where they can go. For a young person with a passion for geoscience, a passion for minerals, listening to this, what are a few words as far as ways that you should think about your career and what your options might be?
Okay, the first one is, because it's so much darn fun. The New Mexico Mineral Symposium is, I'm glad you put in the plug, my opinion as well. It's one of the best events in the mineral world outside of shows. And by the way, there is a show associated with it.
There are minerals being sold. I've sold rocks there. I might do it again.
But it's actually, what's the best thing? The community. We had 300 people last year. I expect to get close to 350 this year.
Wow.
It's like going to today, all of these events to me is like going to a family reunion. I get to see all my friends and my family.
Same here.
Every time I do one of these things. It's just a wonderful event, and we get to play with minerals and learn about things when we go there. So there's lectures, there's parties, there's
Yep.
the mineral museum, there's mineral dealers.
Yep, yep.
There's late nights in the hotel looking
Yeah.
through flats.
Yeah.
It's all, and field trips. It's all
Yeah,
there.
it's the
That's
whole
why you wanna
package.
go there.
It's the whole package.
Yeah.
Great. Cool.
And then I'm sorry, the second question was.
So a few words that you might have for early career
Oh.
geoscientists or folks maybe thinking about a career in geoscience about, you go through school, you go to undergrad, you go to grad school, you love minerals.
Yeah.
Then, the next day you wake up after your PhD and you think, what am I going to
What
do
am I
with my
gonna
career?
do?
I think a lot of folks are envious of the path you've taken, and you've told our listeners how that path has worked for you. But I'm curious if you had a few thoughts, looking backward, about what young people could consider as far as career options and things to think about.
To answer that best, I think one of the things is, unlike environmental geoscience, and actually, by the way, mineralogy is a very, very important tool in environmental science.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested in both of those, there's a lot of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike the oil patch in environmental geoscience, where there's a huge industry,
Mm-hmm.
and you can plan on, there's going to be jobs in that field, so you do your degree and then
Yep.
you apply for those jobs. Mineralogy is a little different,
Yep.
and I think you have to be open-minded and think outside the box. Like I
Okay.
said, my first job offer was for a company that made
Yeah, the big
windshields.
auto glass. Yeah.
Exactly. And it would have been
Yeah.
a great job.
Sure.
By the way, my
Yeah.
first job offer outside of the PhD
Uh-huh.
was to work for General Electric,
Wow.
synthesizing diamonds.
Wow. Cool.
And
Yeah.
which would have been a fantastic job, something
Yeah,
very interesting
wow.
to me. But I got a postdoc
Yep.
in something I really wanted to study, so I decided to go down that road.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think the best thing, again, I could advise is realize that there's no direct one path,
Mm-hmm.
and open every door.
Yeah.
Take the best choice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But if you're not opening all those doors, you're restricting yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's wise. Well, John, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for
Bill,
being on the
Thank
Minsanity
you for inviting
Podcast.
me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.